3 tiny US pennies, older than most people realize, and each one worth more than a luxury car. Point 1 was made by mistake. Point 1 survived against all odds. And 1 still hides in everyday change. Collectors are paying 6 figures for these ancient pennies right now. Take a closer look at your coins because 1 cent could change everything. The year 1960 sits at a fascinating crossroads in the history of the Lincoln 1-cent penny. America was stepping into a new decade. Industry was expanding rapidly, and the U.S. Mint was under pressure to produce massive quantities of coins for a growing economy. Pennies flowed out of minting facilities in overwhelming numbers, passing through countless hands with little thought or attention. Yet hidden within that ocean of ordinary cents are some of the rarest and most astonishing error coins ever created, pieces that today can command prices ranging from $86,990 all the way up to an astonishing $289,000. At first glance, a 1960 Lincoln cent looks familiar and unremarkable. Abraham Lincoln's portrait faces right, steady and dignified, just as it had for decades. The reverse features the Lincoln Memorial, a design that had become deeply embedded in American daily life. These pennies were made primarily from bronze, a copper-based alloy that gave them a warm, rich color. Unlike later zinc cents, these coins had a solid metallic feel, one that collectors today associate with quality and durability. What truly sets the 1960 penny apart is not its appearance at first glance, but what happened behind the scenes during its production. The U.S. Mint struck pennies at multiple facilities, including Philadelphia and Denver, and that year introduced a subtle but important change to the date style. Some pennies were struck with a small date, while others featured a large date. This alone created an immediate point of interest for collectors, but the story goes much deeper. Among the most famous and valuable varieties is the 1960 Doubled Die Obverse. This error occurred during the hubbing process, when the die received more than one impression from the hub at slightly different positions. The result was a doubling effect that became permanently embedded in the die itself. Every coin struck from that die carried the same visual distortion. On these doubled die pennies, the doubling is most noticeable in the date, the word liberty, and the phrase "In God We Trust." Under magnification, the letters appear thick, separated, and almost shadowed. This is not a trick of light or wear. It is a true mint error, created before a single coin was ever struck. High-grade examples of this variety are extraordinarily rare, and when one surfaces in exceptional condition, it can drive prices deep into 6 figures. The presence of both small-date and large-date varieties adds another layer of complexity. Some collectors specialize in identifying subtle differences in the shape of the numerals, particularly the 0 and 6 in the date. When doubling appears on a small-date penny, its rarity increases dramatically. The combination of a desirable date style with a strong double die creates a perfect storm of collectability. But double dies are only part of the 1960 story. This year also produced dramatic off-center strikes, coins that were not properly aligned when struck. These errors result in coins where part of the design is missing entirely, replaced by a smooth, blank crescent of metal. The most valuable off-center 1960 pennies are those that still clearly show the full date and mint mark. These pieces are visually striking and immediately recognizable, making them highly sought after by error coin specialists. Another category that elevates the 1960 penny into legendary status is broad strike errors. When a coin is struck without the retaining collar that controls its diameter, the metal spreads outward unnaturally. The result is a coin that is wider and thinner than normal, with distorted lettering and design elements that seem stretched. On a bronze penny, these broad strikes can be especially dramatic, showcasing flowing metal patterns that feel almost artistic. Die cracks, die breaks, and cuds also play a major role in the 1960 error lineup. As dies wore down under the stress of mass production, cracks formed in the steel. Molten metal filled these cracks during striking, creating raised lines on the finished coin. In extreme cases, pieces of the die broke away entirely, forming large raised blobs known as cuds. Large, bold cuds on 1960 pennies are rare and highly collectible, particularly when they dramatically alter Lincoln's portrait or the lettering point. One of the most intriguing aspects of 1960-era pennies is how long many of them circulated unnoticed. Because pennies were considered nearly worthless even at the time, few people examined them closely. Many error coins were spent, saved casually, or forgotten in jars and drawers. It wasn't until years later, when collectors began systematically studying varieties and errors, that the true significance of these coins was recognized. Condition plays a critical role in value. A circulated 1960 double die penny may be worth thousands, But a mint state example with sharp details and original red luster exists in an entirely different league. Coins preserved in such condition are exceedingly rare because most pennies entered circulation immediately. When a high-grade specimen is authenticated and certified by a professional grading service, it gains credibility and market confidence factors that can push its value toward the upper end of the $86,990 to $289,000 range. The auction history of rare 1960-era pennies is filled with moments that stunned even seasoned collectors. Coins once dismissed as pocket change have sold for prices comparable to luxury homes. These sales are driven not just by rarity, but by the story behind each coin, the accident of its creation, the decades it survived unnoticed, and the sudden realization of its importance. What makes the 1960 Lincoln cent particularly compelling is its balance between accessibility and mystery. It is not an ancient coin, nor is it made of gold or silver. It comes from an era many people still feel connected to, which makes its transformation from ordinary penny to elite collectible even more powerful. Proves that rarity is not always about age or material, but about circumstance. Today, the 1960 rare Lincoln 1-cent era coin stands as a symbol of hidden value. It reminds collectors and everyday people alike that history can be hiding in plain sight. A single cent, struck with a tiny mistake more than 60 years ago, can carry a story worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. In the end, the 1960 Lincoln penny teaches a quiet lesson. Sometimes the most extraordinary treasures are born from the most ordinary beginnings, waiting patiently for the moment someone finally looks closely enough to understand what they are holding. The 1984 Lincoln 1-cent penny is a coin many people remember from everyday life. It's the kind of penny that once piled up in school lunch trays, sat in coffee cans on kitchen counters, or rolled around in the bottom of purses and glove compartments. For most Americans, it represented almost nothing, just spare change from another ordinary year. Yet within that massive production of 1984 pennies lies one of the most talked about and dramatic error stories in modern U.S. numismatics, a story that has pushed certain examples into a staggering value range of $66,000 to as high as $226,000. By the early 1980s, the United States Mint had already changed the composition of the penny. Rising copper prices forced the mint to switch from solid bronze to zinc cores coated with a thin layer of copper. On the outside, the coin looked almost identical to earlier cents, but internally it was completely different. This shift brought new technical challenges. The plating process had to be precise, the planchets had to be uniform, and the dies had to strike cleanly without damaging the thin copper coating. In 1984, the Mint was still perfecting this system while producing billions of coins at an incredible pace. The Lincoln cent design was deeply familiar by this point. Abraham Lincoln's portrait, introduced in 1909, symbolized endurance and unity. The reverse still displayed the Lincoln Memorial, with the seated statue of Lincoln visible inside. The design had become so common that people barely looked at it anymore. That familiarity is one of the reasons the most famous 1984 error went unnoticed for years. Inside the Mint, the process of creating dies involved multiple steps. Master hubs were used to create working hubs, which then produced working dies. If anything went wrong during this process, if a hub impressed the die more than once, or at a slightly different angle, the mistake could be frozen into steel. Every coin struck afterward would carry that same flaw. In 1984, one such mistake became legendary. The most well-known and valuable error from this year is the 1984 Doubled Die Obverse, often nicknamed the doubled ear penny. On this error, Lincoln's ear appears doubled, almost as if an extra outline sits just behind it. At first glance, it can look like a shadow or a trick of the light, but under magnification, the doubling becomes unmistakable. The shape, separation, and clarity reveal that it is not damage or wear. It is a true double die created during the die-making process. What makes this error so special is how subtle yet dramatic it is. Unlike some double dies that show heavy doubling in lettering, the 1984 doubled ear hides in plain sight. Many of these pennies circulated for years before collectors realized what they were seeing. Once the error was identified and confirmed, demand exploded. High-grade examples quickly became some of the most desirable modern Lincoln cents ever discovered. Beyond the doubled ear, the 1984 penny is also associated with strong double die varieties affecting Lincoln's profile, the date, and inscriptions like "Liberty" and "In God We Trust." These double dies show thickness and separation that can only be seen clearly under magnification. Coins with crisp details and minimal wear are extremely rare because most examples spent years in circulation before being recognized. Another layer of rarity comes from plating errors, which were more common during the early zinc era but rarely survive in high condition. Some 1984 pennies show missing or partial copper plating, revealing the dull gray zinc core beneath. Others display bubbling, peeling, or blistering where the copper layer failed to bond properly. While minor plating flaws are relatively common, dramatic, eye-catching examples, especially those preserved in uncirculated condition, are exceptionally scarce and highly collectible. There are also off-center strikes known from this year. These occur when the planchet is not properly aligned in the striking chamber. The result is a coin where part of the design is missing, leaving a crescent of blank metal. The most valuable off-center 1984 pennies are those that still clearly show the full date. These coins are instantly recognizable and visually striking, making them favorites among error collectors. Broad strikes add another dimension to the story. When a penny is struck without the retaining collar that controls its diameter, the metal spreads outward. The coin becomes wider, thinner, and distorted. On a zinc-based penny, this can create dramatic visual effects. Broad-struck 1984 cents with strong detail and original mint luster are extremely difficult to find and can command significant premiums. Die deterioration also played a role in creating unusual varieties. Die cracks, die breaks, and cuds appear on some 1984 pennies due to the immense stress placed on dies during mass production. Raised lines running across the coin or large blobs of metal where pieces of the die broke away create coins that look almost sculptural. Large, bold cuds are especially desirable because they dramatically alter the coin's appearance. What pushes these coins into the $66,000 to $226,000 range is not just the error itself, but condition and certification. A worn doubled ear penny is still valuable, but the coins that set records are those in mint state condition with sharp details and original luster. Professional grading services authenticate the error, confirm it is not damage, and assign a grade that the market trusts. A high-grade certified example can multiply in value compared to a circulated one. The discovery stories surrounding 1984 era pennies are legendary among collectors. Some were found by people casually checking loose change after hearing rumors of a valuable penny. Others were discovered in old rolls purchased from banks decades earlier. There are stories of collectors examining thousands of pennies before finally spotting that unmistakable doubled ear under magnification, realizing they were holding a coin worth more than a luxury car. What makes the 1984 Lincoln cent especially fascinating is that it sits at the intersection of old and new. It's not ancient, it's not made of precious metal, and it was produced in enormous quantities. Yet a small error during the die-making process transformed a handful of these pennies into icons of modern numismatics. Their value comes not from what they are made of, but from how rare and accidental their creation was. Today, the 1984 Lincoln 1-cent error coin stands as a reminder that modern coins can still carry extraordinary stories. It proves that even in an age of automation and quality control, perfection is never guaranteed. A tiny mistake, repeated thousands of times, can turn spare change into a historic collectible. In a world where pennies are often dismissed as worthless, the 1984 error cent challenges that assumption. It shows that value can hide in the most ordinary places, waiting patiently for someone curious enough to look closer. The 1999 D. Lincoln 1-cent penny is one of those coins that feels completely ordinary. It's modern, lightweight, and familiar. The kind of penny that once rattled around in pockets, slipped into tip jars, or sat unnoticed in a car's cup holder. Millions upon millions were struck at the Denver Mint and released into circulation, and for most people, a penny from 1999 barely registers as something worth keeping. Yet hidden among those countless common coins are rare and remarkable error examples that have turned this overlooked cent into a serious collector prize, with documented values ranging from $43,650 to as much as $166,520. By 1999, the United States Mint was operating at full speed. The country was preparing to enter a new millennium, the economy was strong, and the demand for circulating coinage was enormous. Pennies were still produced in massive quantities for everyday transactions, and the Denver Mint worked around the clock to meet that demand. These Lincoln cents were struck on copper-plated zinc planchets, a composition introduced in the early 1980s to reduce production costs. While the coins looked familiar on the surface, the minting process behind them was anything but simple. The Lincoln cent design, first introduced in 1909, had become an enduring symbol of American coinage. Abraham Lincoln's portrait on the obverse represented unity, perseverance, and leadership, while the reverse, featuring the Lincoln Memorial, honored both the president and one of the nation's most iconic monuments. By 1999, the design had been in use for decades, and that familiarity worked against it. Because the coin looked the same year after year, Most people assumed nothing unusual could ever come from it. Inside the mint, however, the process involved high-speed presses, steel dies, and intense pressure. Each blank planchet was fed into a press and struck with tremendous force in a fraction of a second. Dies were used repeatedly, often tens of thousands of times, until they wore down or developed flaws. When something went wrong, and it occasionally did, the resulting error could slip through quality control and enter circulation unnoticed. One of the most valuable error types associated with the 1999 D. Lincoln penny is the doubled die error. This occurs when a working die receives a misaligned impression during its creation, causing parts of the design to appear doubled on every coin struck from that die. On certain 1999 D pennies, collectors have identified strong doubling on Lincoln's profile, particularly around the eye, nose, and beard. The lettering in Liberty, the date, and In God We Trust may appear thickened or shadowed. Under magnification, the doubling becomes unmistakable, instantly signaling that the coin is far from ordinary. Another dramatic category involves off-metal or wrong planchet strikes. These errors happen when a penny design is struck onto a blank intended for another denomination or an improperly prepared planchet. Some 1999 D pennies have been found struck on planchets meant for foreign coins or on blanks that were missing their copper plating. These pieces may appear silver-colored, unusually thin or lighter than normal. Once authenticated, off-metal 1999 D pennies have stunned collectors and fetched extraordinary prices in private sales and auctions. Missing or partial plating errors are also closely associated with this year. Because the 1999 penny was made of zinc with a thin copper coating, problems during the plating process could result in coins where large areas of zinc are exposed. These coins often show a dull gray appearance instead of the normal copper color. While minor plating issues are collectible, dramatic examples with large exposed areas, especially in high condition, are extremely rare and highly sought after. The off-center strike is another visually striking error found among 1999 D. Lincoln cents. This occurs when the planchet is not properly aligned in the press, causing only part of the design to be struck. The most valuable examples show a significant portion of blank space while still clearly displaying the date and mint mark. These coins are instantly recognizable even to non-collectors, and their bold appearance adds to their desirability. There are also broad strikes, which happen when a coin is struck without the retaining collar that normally controls its diameter. Without that collar, the metal spreads outward, producing a wider, flatter coin with distorted design details. On a penny, this effect is easy to spot. Broad-struck 1999 D pennies with strong detail and original luster are rare and command impressive premiums. Die deterioration errors, including die cracks, die breaks, and cuds, add another layer of intrigue. As dies wore down from constant use, cracks formed and sometimes pieces broke away entirely. Coins struck afterward display raised lines or thick blobs of metal where the die was damaged. Large, dramatic cuds on 1999 D pennies are especially prized for their bold, almost sculptural appearance. What truly separates an interesting error from a high-value treasure is condition and professional grading. A heavily circulated error penny may be worth hundreds or thousands, but the coins that reach the upper end of the $43,650 to $166,520 range are typically uncirculated, sharply struck, and professionally certified. Grading services authenticate the coin, identify the error, and assign a grade that gives buyers confidence. Mint state examples with original luster are especially desirable. The discovery stories surrounding these pennies are often as fascinating as the coins themselves. Some collectors found them while searching rolls of pennies obtained from banks, carefully examining each coin under bright lights and magnification. Others surfaced in old collections, jars, or drawers where they had been sitting unnoticed for years. In several cases, people nearly spent these coins, unaware that a small difference in appearance or weight made them extraordinary. What makes the 1999 D. Lincoln penny so compelling is how modern it is. There's no silver, no gold, and no ancient history attached to it. Its value comes entirely from error, rarity, and survival. In a system designed for uniformity and efficiency, these small mistakes created coins that stand apart from the millions of perfect strikes. Today, the 1999 D. Lincoln 1-cent error coin serves as a powerful reminder that valuable discoveries don't always come from the distant past. Sometimes they hide in plain sight, disguised as ordinary pocket change. A penny that once seemed insignificant can carry a story of chance, imperfection, and unexpected worth. Proof that even the smallest coin can hold extraordinary value when the right mistake meets the right moment.